Hi, my name is Amy Jimenez, and today I will be presenting about the regulation of the gastric phase of digestion. So starting off with a brief introduction to the digestive system, the function of the digestive system is essentially to move nutrients, water, and electrolytes from the external environment to our internal environment. This typically consists of 3 phases or steps, and that would be digestion, absorption, and secretion. Starting off with digestion, this is the breakdown of foods into small units, which would then be absorbed by the small intestine. Absorption is the movement of substances from the GI tract to the extracellular fluid. And then secretion would be movement of substances the opposite way of absorption. So this would move substances and water from the ECF to the digestive tract of the lumen. The digestive tract lumen, sorry about that. The organs involved, and I listed them out here as the pathway of what ingested food would go through. So it starts in the mouth, then proceeds into the esophagus, then into the stomach, the small intestine, the large intestine, and then the colon. There are 3 functions to the stomach. So the first function would be storage. The stomach stores food and regulates passage of substance into the small intestines. Then would be digestion. Digestion is essentially the breakdown of food into chyme, and chyme is defined here as the semi-fluid substance of partially digested food and digestive juices. Then lastly would be defense, and the stomach protects the body from foreign invaders and pathogens that are consumed. This slide talks about the regulation of the gastric phase of digestion. The gastric phase is highly regulated, and it is initiated with the cephalic phase. The cephalic phase is a digestive reflux that is triggered by the sight and smell of food. It elicits gastric acid and pepsinogen secretion in the stomach. So this is essentially why our mouth waters when we see or smell food, and that's why sometimes our stomach growls when we see food walking past us in a restaurant or we see a video about food. Yes, it elicits gastric acid and pepsinogen secretion in the stomach. The stomach relaxes and expands to hold food, and it is essentially divided by its function. So the upper stomach holds food until it is ready for digestion, and then the lower stomach is responsible for digestion. So it utilizes enzymes to break down foods into smaller units so that it can be reabsorbed in the small intestine. And this process is highly regulated because there are specific enzymes that are secreted to break down this food, and also the amount of food that gets pushed down into the small intestine is highly regulated by contractile waves. The contractile waves push very small amounts of chyme towards the small intestine at a time, and it does this because it tries to not overwhelm the small intestine, because the small intestine is a site of absorption, and if too much is given to the small intestine at a time, absorption would not be as efficient. And then lastly, the lumen is lined with mucus and also contains pits with gastric glands. And I will go into that further in the next slide. So here is a depiction or a drawing of what a gastric gland looks like in our stomach. It contains many cells, as you can see, and I'll go into that in the next slide. So the secretory cells of the gastric gland. First, I'm going to talk about mucus surface cells, and these cells are responsible for secreting mucus, which acts as a barrier against irritants and harsh acidic properties of the enzymes that we secrete. So essentially this is a barrier to protect our stomach. Parietal cells secrete gastric acid and intrinsic factor. Gastric acid is extremely important because it secretes or it has hydrochloric acid, which kills bacteria. Hydrochloric acid is also responsible for activating pepsin, and it triggers the release of somatostatin. Parietal cells also secrete intrinsic factor. This helps the body absorb vitamin B12, which is essential for our red blood cells. BC cells secrete histamine, which in turn secrete gastric acid. Chief cells secrete pepsinogen and gastric lipase. Pepsinogen is the inactive form of pepsin. So once pepsinogen meets with hydrochloric acid, it becomes activated and becomes pepsin. And pepsin is extremely important for the digestion of proteins. Gastric lipase is responsible for digesting fats. So these two properties are secreted by the chief cells. D cells are responsible for secreting somatostatin, and somatostatin is pretty much known as an inhibitor of our body. In the GI tract, it is responsible for inhibiting gastric secretion, and this allows our gastric system to, it pretty much maintains like a checks and balance and homeostasis in our GI tract because it ensures that there's not too much gastric activity happen. It essentially buffers the gastric activity. And then G cells are responsible for secreting gastrin. So there's a lot of components to digestion in our GI tract, and a lot of the moving parts are done by the secretory cells of the gastric gland, and how they all interact with each other to activate or buffer out each other. Any sort of disruption to either one of these cells can lead to severe illnesses or abnormalities in our GI tract, such as ulcers or stuff like that. And lastly is references, which I primarily use the textbook.